Well, hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. We have been here before. Cast your mind back to China imposing some tariffs on Canada in retaliation for the Huawei debacle. They already had the two Michaels in their custody being held hostage. Now, in the last week, China has imposed 100% tariffs on Canadian canola producers. That impacts Saskatchewan, Alberta most profoundly, and not a word. So here are our farmers getting hit twice, not only with American tariffs, but now Chinese tariffs. And this is, I mean, China's our second largest customer for canola after the US of A. So we are going to Sylvain Charlebois, the food professor, as he's known, director of Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie, and talk about this and the broader issues, and of course the climate issues as well that impact this. Welcome. How are you?
Very good, Senator. How are you?
Well, other than the fact that we're living in crazy times, I guess I'm fine.
That's right. No, it's been interesting. It's been an interesting 2025 so far, for sure. And I'm sure you've been in Ottawa more often than most people would know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so Canada imposes tariffs. The Americans are not the only guys doing this. We impose tariffs on EVs coming from China and say, no, 100% tariff. And China hits back on canola. And as I said, not a word. So why do they do that?
Well, so first of all, China actually aimed at canola, but they also aim at fish and seafood as well. So our lobster industry is in panic right now, as much as the Canola Council and the canola industry as well. So it's really, I mean, the Chinese, you got to give one thing to China. They understand geopolitics incredibly well. And this is something we're absolutely terrible at as a country. Canada is, as far as I'm concerned. So back in October, Ottawa decided to implement tariffs against Chinese EVs to make sure that the tenant in the White House then, President Biden, was kept happy, but he's no longer there, and we still have these tariffs in place. And I don't know about you, Senator, but a lot of sectors, ag sectors, were holding their breath since October to see exactly what was going to happen, and nothing was happening until last weekend. What was going on last weekend? We were appointing a new prime minister. It's not a coincidence. So China is very good at geopolitics, sending a clear message to Canada that this is a punitive measure aiming at our economy, but in places that really hurts us very much. But it's a place that, unfortunately, Central Canada doesn't seem to care enough about. It is going to impact our economy.
To this, I've got to say, I end up reacting just as a Westerner. You know, there's Team Canada around oil and gas and putting export taxes on that to be part of the team, but no, support if you want to run a pipeline, or if you want the clean fuel standard gone, or if you want carbon taxes reduced. And now it's the same here. Literally, there was not a word from any leader, including the new one, about what an outrage this was. And so there they sit. No, we're all so focused now on Trump and reacting to that every moment, that this is a serious one that is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Absolutely. So we've had a urban-centric, Central Canada-centric government for the last 9.5 years. And I'm not convinced starting tomorrow we'll see a new regime coming out of Ottawa, unfortunately. It's not necessarily encouraging. And so I'm hoping that at some point there'll be some sympathy and perhaps some coherence when it comes to trade policies. Because right now, like, I'm looking at all sorts of things happening in Ottawa, the carbon tax, and of course the counter tariffs. And frankly, Senator, I'm not even convinced Canada or Canadians understand the implications of counter tariffs. It is going to actually hit our economy, like the entire economy.
I want you to really explore that because I know you've been writing about this, the cost of retaliation, headline, Canada's trade war misstep. And because everybody is saying, oh, hit them hard and hit them hard. And Doug Ford was right, put that tariff on there, even though he took it back 15 minutes later, but that we should engage in a tariff for tariff. You're saying that's a very risky proposition for the Canadian consumer.
Absolutely, and I'm drawing a parallel between the carbon tax and tariffs for one clear reasons. I think both of them are coming from the same school of thought. So the carbon tax is being implemented so people feel that the government is doing something about something very complex, which is climate change. And of course, we need to address climate change. But is the carbon tax the best policy moving forward? We're not even measuring how the carbon tax is impacting climate right now, but we're still punishing businesses and impacting the competitiveness of our sector, of our economy. Same thing with counter tariffs. Counter tariffs are making people feel good because we're responding, we're tough. The dollar for dollar talk it sounds very tough for Canadians, but they don't understand, I don't think, many Canadians don't understand how it's going to impact the cost of living in Canada. And it is likely going to cost jobs over time. And so, again, we see a government not necessarily looking at targets or targeting specific sectors in the U.S. to really hurt them hard. So Donald Trump listens. That's exactly what Premier Ford did in Ontario. Yeah. He may have failed to implement his tariff on electricity, but he got the president's attention.
Yeah. And so he's at meetings, and that's where we're at. And look, if our economy was in great shape and we didn't have interprovincial trade barriers, and if our productivity was high, and if our numbers were good, we could maybe take the hit, the blowback that comes back to us through counter tariffs or tariffs, because that price gets just priced in or put into the things that we still need to buy and consume from the U.S. in order for our industry and our sectors to grow, and that's where we get hit. We're not an island here. We're very much integrated.
Absolutely. We're going through a crisis right now. I don't think we're wasting this crisis. There is some movement. Yeah. We need to recognize that there is some movement around interprovincial trade barriers. I think you and I have spoken about this for many years now.
About 100 times, yeah.
Finally something is happening. And if there are regions that have actually paid a dear price due to barriers, certainly the prairies and the Atlantic where I am right now, for sure. Yeah. So this is really a step in the right direction. However, Senator, of course, Ottawa decided to focus on a roadmap to eliminate all barriers except for food. And you know why? Supply management, of course. Yeah. Supply management.
Okay, let's get into it because, and we'll come back to some of the other issues because we had the PBO report on emissions caps and all those things that impact the ag sector too. But Donald Trump, while he's very focused on steel and aluminum tariffs, there's no question about that. That's the core of his military building sector, and he's got a new, interest in shipbuilding again. But from the get-go, for 15, 20 years, what's been in Donald Trump's mind is supply management.
Yes.
That's what his focus was in the last round of trade negotiations, and that's what it will be again. So, why the focus? Why is he so concerned about that? And then what you think is going to happen. But let's start there.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm not convinced that President Trump understands supply management, to be honest, or Mr. Lupnick either. Yeah. But I would argue that also many Canadian politicians don't understand supply management either. It's a really
give us the short course here. Give us the
short course to explain why it is so political. So there are three pillars to supply management. One, you have quotas managed by provinces. Yeah. And Quebec, with 20% of the population, has almost 40% of quotas nationally. So there you go. That's one reason why all provinces are holding on to their quotas, especially Quebec. So, I mean, if one day someone decides, let's harmonize the allocation of quotas nationally, Quebec would have an easy fit, obviously,
Yeah.
for obvious reasons. Two, the CDC, the Canadian Dairy Commission, charged with the task of setting a fair price for farmers. So they survey farmers to set the fair price. And that's part of why our farming sector in dairy is not very competitive, because we set that fair price is very high, which makes the entire sector a little lazy, if you will. There's no incentive to become more competitive. And lastly, and that's really Mr. Trump's target, tariffs on imports, very protective tariffs in order for quotas to work, in order for quota values to be protected, you need to protect the market. So some tariffs will vary anywhere between 250 to 320%. So if you're a butter manufacturer in the US, selling butter in Canada, you would have to pay a 298% tariff. And that's been really on Mr. Trump's mind for a long time. He would want to sell as much as possible to Canada. That voice is coming out of Wisconsin mainly. And Wisconsin has more dairy cows than the entire country of Canada.
Really? One state?
Yep. One state.
So that's his issue, because that's politics for him.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind, because we're only 41 million people. So why would he actually make this such an issue? I think he's basically aiming at supply management because he knows it's a contentious issue for us right here at home. And he knows that the lobby here is very, very tough, very strong. In fact, Senator, in December, I was testifying against Bill 282.
Yes.
And
this was to protect supply management in any kind of
during trade negotiation, including with the U.S. And dairy farmers bust about 30 or 40 dairy farmers to watch my testimony. They were just breathing behind me on my neck. It was just pure intimidation. That's how they work. And they know, Trump knows that this lobby is incredibly powerful and strong. So he's trying to break things up, and he loves breaking things up.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And now we're headed into an election, probably sooner than later. And that again is an issue, because if Mark Carney wants to get elected, he doesn't want to annoy Quebec, and for Pierre Poilievre, it will be the same issue.
Oh, absolutely. And I've had discussions with different folks in Ottawa, and nobody wants to touch supply management. I mean, right now, I would say that there is one disruptor that could actually make things a little bit more interesting, and that disruptor is not Canadian. His name is Donald Trump. I mean, I think we all know that. The writing is on the wall. Yeah. It's just a matter of time. I mean, again, Minister Hanan last week, when she announced that she was actually breaking up all barriers except for food, I knew we're still not there domestically. Yeah. So we need someone outside of our country to make some damage.
Well, and that's the one thing people will give Trump, is he's making us look in the mirror at the issues we've got with interprovincial trade barriers and with, all sorts of specific issues like this. But then what is the response? Because our response has kind of been, we don't want to be bullied by the bully anymore. So is that going to prevent us from actually taking the action, which is in our own best interest?
But there is something happening, Senator Wallen, right now, because I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've had my fair share of nasty emails and
a lot of bruises, a lot
of bruises, of course. And let's put it this way: Dalhousie campus security has a big file of emails and things like that. It is what it is, but I'm getting more emails supporting our point of view in terms of reforming supply management. And I've always argued to the dairy farmers, and I speak to dairy farmers, not boards. Boards are separate.
Right.
Farmers aren't the problem here. Boards are. Yeah. And when I talk to farmers, I say, this is the opportunity to change on your own terms. This is the time. Instead of just letting both Ottawa and Washington dictate your future, let's look at a reform. And that's why we published a couple of years ago Supply Management 2.0 with the Inner Guelph. It is a roadmap to a stronger dairy sector in Canada. I think Canadians deserve a stronger dairy sector, but right now, boards absolutely do not want to hear about it.
You sent another X post, and this was an open letter to the Prime Minister of Canada, to Trudeau, and it was kind of interesting. And I'll just quote a couple of lines here. My work, meaning your work, has focused on how policies influence the affordability, security, and resilience of our food system. Over the past decade, I've witnessed global supply chains being strained, inflationary pressures reshaping household budgets, and our agricultural sector facing mounting regulatory and economic hurdles. A widening disconnect between policy decisions and the realities of food production, distribution, and affordability. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So we've talked about this kind of the urban centric nature, the politics of Quebec that seem to affect every political leader of every political stripe. What's at stake here if we don't actually fix this? We pride ourselves as being the food basket of the world, and that, we can feed the world, and that we have food and regulatory stability, but it's almost like we're choking ourselves with our own rules.
Absolutely. Well, you work in Ottawa. You certainly know that there is a pecking order when it comes to the government itself, correct? So you have the PMO, the PCO, Treasury, Finance, Health. You have all sorts of ministries and groups that have tremendous power in Ottawa. But in the last decade or so, Ag Canada has been really, at the lower end of the pecking order in Ottawa. That needs to go up. That needs to go up. We need to give it a profile. We need a strong minister. I remember Kathleen Wynne. I was actually at Guelph when Kathleen Wynne appointed herself, when she was Premier of Ontario, she appointed herself as Ag Minister. Yeah. And that really sent out a really clear signal to the province saying this ag and food is really important. That's the kind of signal we need from the government in Ottawa to just, because at the end of my note to Prime Minister Trudeau, if you actually read the whole thing, it says in the end, listen to stakeholders, listen to farmers, listen to processors, listen to them for good policy, better policy. So prioritize ag and food, prioritize those policies while listening to people out there feeding us.
But surely, given history, you're not really too optimistic about that.
No. Well, I mean, listen, I do think so. I hope that Mr. Carney will see this as a priority. And I hope that the next campaign coming up will allow Canadians to really voice their concerns about food security in Canada. I hope so. Every time I hope the same thing, but every time I finish the campaign being extremely disappointed, because there's always, as you know, there's always things going on during a campaign that goes beyond food. But I'm hoping that the next government will absolutely prioritize food, no matter who it is. I think it's really important to recognize that we have some major challenges ahead of us. If that one pillar of food security is leaving us or betraying us, and that's the U.S. I mean, we have this North American bubble that we've relied on for many years. If they're no longer part of the game, we're going to have to redefine ourselves as a nation.
Well, this is the thing, and we've got, the free trade renegotiations coming up, and there's a lot of things there. I mean, we have these conversations. A car goes back and forth across the border 5 times. The market's integrated. It can be hard. Same issue for cattle. They go back and forth across the border.
Well, we talk a lot about cars, but it's the same thing for grains, livestock. I mean, you name it. So, the ideal scenario is to really get along with Americans, but I don't think it's going to be on the table for the next little while, unfortunately.
But can we go tomorrow and say, oh, well, now we're going to develop new markets and we're just going to not worry about it? I mean, when it comes to even things like canola, if we're not selling to the U.S., we're selling to China. And that's a whole other issue that is problematic for many Canadians and many politicians.
Well, so let's stop banking for example, $50 billion on a sector that doesn't exist. And yesterday we just learned that Norfolk is actually under receivership
the
in
EV sector,
Europe.
even the money we gave to the battery plants, they were out of date before they even started.
It's $50 billion supporting a house of cards, and we're sacrificing our farmers. So can we stop doing that for now? And that's going to help our cause. Yes, China is a big deal. We need to deal with them. And India is another part. Europe. I mean, how is it that we buy for $8 billion worth of food from Europe and we sell for $4 billion and they're 500 million people and we're 41 million? Like, okay, how is that possible? So we're supposed to be selling way more food to Europe. The reason is pretty simple, and you know this. Money's like water. Water will always follow the easiest path downhill, and that downhill was the United States of America.
Yeah.
So let's figure out a new way to funnel water somewhere else.
Yeah. And running it uphill is going to cost a little bit. For example, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, when our European partners asked for LNG, we said, no, there's no business case. When it should have been we should be having another conversation about where we might send energy and the importance of not only taking it out of the ground, but selling it and making it useful.
Exactly. It seems that when I look at Donald Trump right now, President Trump, I would say, because we always say he's a transactional president. He deals much more effectively bilaterally than anyone else, which is true. But when you look at Ottawa's strategy, it's very much the same with a different style. We don't understand that geopolitics are about dealing with many moving parts at the same time. And I don't think we appreciate that as much as we should.
One of the things because you've mentioned it a couple of times, is the climate. And what we know about the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is that this has been his life's work. The question of net zero. He established the Glasgow group on net zero. Ambassador from the UN, travels the world, goes to Davos, talks about these issues, and he's been very consistent that he sees this as the core to a strong economy. But if we're using punitive fiscal measures, which we are, things like the carbon tax, the clean fuel standard, the emissions caps, if we're using those punitive measures to influence the climate outcome, then we are also impacting our ability to become more productive, to feed not only our own kids, but everybody else, to have that the ag sector, which is so dependent on the energy sector. Just talk about that trade-off for a moment, because I find it very troubling, particularly in these difficult times.
Absolutely, and I've had the pleasure to meet Mark Carney once many years ago, and had the pleasure to do a podcast with his wife, actually, because she's involved with Eurasia.
She's a very big environmental activist. Yeah,
that's right. And so both of them very much around net zero, and it's concerning to me because it's a complete departure from the economic architecture that we have in Canada, and so.
Explain what you mean.
Well, oil and gas is a big part of our economy. I mean, let's face it. And because of the fact that we've politicized oil and gas in central Canada, I'm here talking to you right now from Halifax in a home heated with oil coming from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Like how is that socially acceptable?
Right.
So you kind of have to make some compromises along the way. If net zero is the end game for you, fine. So we know the end game, but the process to get there, you need to be appreciative that there is a legacy also. And it's not the entire country that actually has to adopt that approach. And so this stick approach, I've always been uncomfortable with this stick approach because it's not empowering businesses to see carbon as an opportunity. We're starting to hardwire companies and citizens to see carbon as a punitive excuse to punish consumers, punish consumption. In the United States, I actually firmly believe that Donald Trump is slowly shifting his economy towards a consumption economy. He is trying to basically use trade policies to support his domestic fiscal policies by bringing down taxation.
Yeah.
So instead of actually being taxed as an American citizen, what I think what he's trying to do is, whenever you spend money, that's when you pay taxes, basically, with tariffs. I think that's where he's going, and he wants low interest rates too, as well.
Yeah.
So that's.
But he wants the consumer, every time they spend money, to be giving that money to an American company. Now, that's going to hurt not just us, but everybody. But he wants to repatriate. Yes, we all, love the cheap stuff at Walmart and all the rest of it. But he's saying, the steel's going to be made here, and the car's going to be made here, and the pop can is going to be made here, and the phone is going to be made here. And that is what is going to make a productive economy. We're already at a complete disadvantage with the Americans. Our productivity is half.
Oh, absolutely. So he has a more productive economy. He's got a very affluent economy as well. He believes that the Bretton Woods deal that was signed decades ago is a bad one for America because multilateralism has been bad for America. At least that's what he believes.
Yeah,
I don't agree with that, but that's what he believes. And multilateralism has been very good for Canada because we're only 41 million people in the northern, and we're a northern country, and we need trades. Same for Australia because of its distances, and New Zealand, and so on and so forth. But for the next little while, we're gonna have to think differently. So if net zero is the end game, given this context, I don't know how it's going to work. We're
a resource-based economy. This is the problem. We take energy out of the hewers of wood and the drawers of water.
If you want to make our country poor, sure, go ahead. But I don't think that's what Canadians are signing. Right now. I don't think that's what they want. They want a prosperous economy. They want a stronger Canada, not a weaker Canada.
I mean, to be clear, everybody cares about the environment. Everybody has children or grandchildren.
Absolutely.
And, it's not, I don't think anybody's trying to make that argument. It's about at what price that as a sole priority comes. Because the price is high for our energy producers, our farmers, the people that create the real goods.
The one part of the letter that I sent out publicly to Prime Minister Trudeau was that he was successful in making this a either or scenario for all of his policies. If you were against me, you were against Canada.
Yeah.
If you're against the carbon tax, you're against the environment. You don't believe in climate change. You're a denier. And that's been very divisive. If there is one thing that needs to stop with Prime Minister Carney, that is exactly this. We can't afford to have divisions in debates, important debates like this. It just doesn't help at all.
That's why everybody is so anxious for an election, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, is because we need to debate this. These issues were not debated for 9 years. Parliament hasn't been sitting for a while. We have a pretty good idea of where Mr. Carney comes from on these issues, but through the leadership campaign in his own party that propelled him to prime ministership, these issues weren't debated. So it actually needs to, and I think even more particularly maybe in the context of the trade war with the U.S. at this point.
Senator, I couldn't believe that Parliament was prorogued while our country was facing arguably one of the worst economic crises in our history. And that was the decision that was made. I disagreed. I disagreed with it. And the cabinet felt it had all the tools in place to deal with it. But at the end of the day, it's about the Canadian people, and Parliament represents the Canadian people. And I do think that we've started to tackle this crisis very oddly in a ineffective way. So I'm hoping that let's give a government a strong mandate and let's move forward.
Yeah.
and give that government a strong mandate to fight for Canadians and not make foolish decisions, as we've seen in recent weeks, to be honest.
We've seen the premiers talk now. I'm hoping, as we've discussed briefly, a very good game on interprovincial trade barriers coming down. But as you say, with the exception of selling more wine to one another,
And
which
beer.
maybe we and beer, maybe we all need more of,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
food remains pretty key to that for actually the state and fate of the country. I think that
Yeah.
argument just really has to be clear.
You have to be blind not to see that right now Canada is economically vulnerable and politically vulnerable. I mean, we saw everyone go to Washington. Like
Yep.
we're talking all premiers, more than once. City
Yep.
mayors went to
Yep.
Washington, ministers. I mean, it's just been unbelievable.
The airlines are doing a great business. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's been chaotic. And now we have corporations like Loblaw putting T's right next to prices to show people what products are being impacted by tariffs because they want to make sure they're not blamed for higher prices. But let's face it, right now we are seeing Canadians taking their matters into their own hands. They're rejecting America at the grocery store, which is fine. It's great. I mean, let's actually promote local. But the entire American sentiment is pretty strong.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how healthy that is, but anyways, it's quite strong. But right now you're seeing companies trying to get ahead of what's actually happening with policies because they know at some point someone's going to have to pay the bill. Food prices are going to go up.
Yep.
So you can't eat grapes from South Africa and expect the same price as grapes from California.
Yeah.
It's just
And
it doesn't work that way.
grapes from Saskatchewan because we don't grow any.
Darn. I thought you had some vineyards. I thought you had a couple of vineyards, don't you?
Yeah, I think there's one.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I think this issue is really important because so many Canadians have embraced that because everybody's looking for a way to try to make a difference in their own
Take
life.
control.
Yeah,
Take
and
control.
some sense of control in this
Yeah.
period of
So I
chaos.
fully respect Canadians rejecting America at the grocery store, and I think it's a way to express themselves
Yeah.
against. I mean,
But
let's
can
face
we
it.
really do it? Because then we have to get into this nitty gritty. You know, is it a product of Canada? Is it packaged in Canada? Does the, cardboard box come from somewhere else? Like, this is the point about having highly integrated economies that have given consumers better prices. If we don't want them integrated, if we want to do the make it buy it here, it's going to cost more. That's the simple
Oh,
kind of
absolutely.
bottom line.
I mean, I was actually out at Costco and saw some neighbors, and they were actually looking to not buy American products. And I told them, you know that you're at Costco right now, right?
Yes.
So they knew, but so
Yeah.
everyone is actually expressing themselves, their discontent in different ways. And I think you kind of have to respect that a little bit.
Yeah, no,
But
for sure. Like
but
everybody
there are
else.
consequences to what's happening. That's really important for people to know. Counter tariffs and everything else, there are consequences to what we're doing right now.
Yeah. Always, as usual, clear thinking on this. Like we're all in this together, but we need to figure
Sometimes it
out.
doesn't feel like it, but yes, we
No,
are
it
all in this
doesn't,
together.
but we are, and that is why this, kind of educating each other about what matters here. As you say, why are you heating your home with oil from Saudi Arabia when we live in Canada? That we've really got to wrestle some of these things, and
Absolutely.
we have to respond when China puts a 100% tariff on one of our largest and most important issues because the canola industry and the lobster industry creates jobs across this country. It's not just a farmer in Saskatchewan or a fisherman on the East Coast, right? It's
Exactly. No,
so,
it's the Atlantic and the prairies paying
yeah,
the bill to protect jobs in Ontario and Quebec
yeah,
for an industry that still doesn't exist yet.
yeah. No,
The
that's
irony.
really the irony of it all. All right. Well, here we are. We're becoming militants here on the, on the out,
It,
on the, those of
it's
us.
almost, your podcast is almost therapeutic, you know?
Yes, that's what we're doing. It's therapy. Honestly, so great to talk to you, Sylvain. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Sylvain Charlebois, director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. He's got his own podcast called The Food Professor, right? So people can find that there because he talks about this every day, and then every couple of weeks he comes and talks to me about it too. But we're gonna do our bit here. We're gonna do our bit. Thanks again. That's great, and thanks to all of you for listening to this. We'll see you again very soon for another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Bye for now.